Howard Altman, Senior Managing Editor of Military Times. I'm here today with Mike Repass, retired Army Major General, the former commander of U.S. Special Operations Command in Europe, and now the CEO and founder of Able Global Solutions. Mike, thank you so very much for coming on today.
Thanks, Howard. It's good to see you again, my friend.
And what kind of advice are you providing for them?
So they're really in a prior to 8 days ago, they were in a sprint to do a lot of reforms inside the military and inside the government, actually, to comply with European Union standards and also with NATO standards. And there's a whole lot of standards they have to meet in terms of governance. On the military side, they have to reform their doctrine, tactics, processes, et cetera, to conform to something that approaches NATO, as opposed to a follow-on Soviet analog, if you will, that they were using at the time.
What were you observing of their ability to make those reforms and to conform more to NATO standards?
The willingness was high at all levels. The ability was somewhat constrained by, I would say, rather archaic processes, starting at the very top. In our legal tradition, if you will, and even in the military, that which is not prohibited is allowed. Well, somewhat the inverse over there, that which is not specifically directed is therefore prohibited. So they have to be directed to do just about everything. And so that has a way of corroding whatever initiative there is out there. People, generally speaking, I would say people work within their authorities to get things done quite well. At the tactical level, they're very well trained. And I mean that from battalion level and below.
We're now a little more than a week into this attack. Are you surprised by how well Ukraine has defended itself, and what do you see?
Howard, I've been asked that question a lot, and resoundingly, I have to say no. I'm not surprised at all. And the reason I'm not surprised is because they've been trained by the best out there. They've been trained by primarily the Americans at the JMTGU. On the conventional side, and then on the special operations side, every NATO partner is in there doing something. They've got 15 different nations in there contributing, and I have no doubts that they're executing brilliantly at the tactical level. It's at the senior levels that we start running into different challenges, and it's I would say it's a product of archaic systems, not the leadership. My personal observation of the senior leaders is that they're superb, from the head guy, the head commander-in-chief, General Zaluzhny, the service chiefs on down. All of them are combat veterans. All of them are good friends. All of them have known each other. They've all served together out in the Donbass area, what they call the JFO. So they know each other. It's an extremely cohesive team from the senior man down to the tactical level. Plus, they're fighting a home game. They're on their turf. They're defending their homeland. They have the motivation to do well.
What are the Ukrainians doing right? What are you seeing them doing right on the battlefield right now? As you talk to them, as you deal with them on a daily basis, right?
What I see is that they're very good at small unit tactics, and that's where they're really beating them, is at the small unit level. At the large scale maneuver, they've kind of, I won't say they've culminated, but they're somewhat fixed in the defense, and they're trying to beat him down long enough that they can go back on the offense. They've had small offensive operations to take back some of the initiative at the local tactical level, and they're doing spoiling attacks and things like that. But they're mainly in a defensive array, and quite frankly, the terrain favors the defender. They can't get off the roads. The terrain is off the roads is just a muddy quagmire, and it'll be that way for the next 6 weeks. So anything that gets off the roads gets sunk into mud. That's part of the reason you see this 40-mile long convoy up there.
How are you seeing those weapons working? They're working very well, aren't they, at the tactical level?
Yeah, I've seen the same videos that you guys are seeing. A lot of blown up tanks, a lot of disabled armored personnel carriers, things like that. So I do know that they're still using their RPGs on the lighter armor tanks or armor personnel carriers. But for the heavy armor, they need javelins, and the in-law They're soon to get the German Panzerfaust 3, which is a very good weapon as well. On one hand, the terrain is vast, and they have to cross contested territory. On the other hand, Russia's using 150,000 to 175,000 troops to try to control that type of landmass, and it's not going to work.
There's been a lot of talk about foreign fighters coming to the call for foreign fighters to go to Ukraine. What do you think of that idea? Is that a good idea for people, and how's that going to work?
Going back to the even during the Soviet era, there's a large Ukrainian diaspora in Canada and the United States, for example, and in Europe, and they fought bravely and valiantly during World War II. After the war, they formed the resistance based out of Munich, Germany, and then the diaspora moved back into Canada and the United States. So there's a large international community of Ukrainians out and about. So they maintain a strong allegiance to their homeland. So there's that aspect of it. In 2014, when Putin invaded, a lot of these people came back. They formed independent battalions and with just basically a pickup team to do various things. There weren't a whole lot of people that were there to do the fighting. However, due to Soviet or Russian influence and due to corruption inside the Ukrainian military prior to 2014, they had no viable combat service support capabilities. That was made up for by volunteers out of the Ukrainian population. So what happened was the Ukrainian people, on their own accord, sua sponte, created these support groups to go out and do medical evacuation, medical treatment, bringing them food, doing all manner of combat service support functions, the best they could to support their troops out in the east. And there really wasn't much to support down south, quite frankly. So this became somewhat of a patriotic duty and obligation inside of the Ukrainian culture.
Zelensky talked yesterday about 16,000 people. I talked to the embassy in DC. He said about 3,000 Americans have applied. I talked to some of the Ukraine that said hundreds have already arrived. What is the danger or what is the benefit of, and they want veterans, especially with combat experience, they don't want untrained people. But what do you see as the pros and cons of such an approach, and what could they possibly do?
They can occupy space and guard critical infrastructure, so that your frontline infantry troops and so forth don't have to do that. They can do community watch patrols. A lot of these reconnaissance and sabotage patrols from the Russians that have been picked up by community watch organizations that were unarmed, but were able to report them on cell phones to have the interior service or the police show up and detain these cats. And in many cases, it led to pitched gun battles. So they can do ancillary support roles, and in limited cases where people show up with some type of combat experience, or perhaps they're a retired or a discharged veteran, then perhaps they can put on some type of uniform and go back into action.
What do you think the dangers are of that, or is it something that's just a plus for Ukraine forces?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, there are, when you mix untrained people in with combat forces, that is a high degree of peril, not only to themselves, the untrained people, but also to the trained combat forces. Imagine that you got somebody with an automatic weapon or a crew-served weapon that has been given a 2-hour block of instruction on that, and you're out there trying to maneuver around with some guy providing suppressing fire. That's a dicey proposition. It has to be a person that's there for a reason that is legitimate, other than I want to go kill a commie for mommy or something like that. It's the psychopaths and the sociopaths need not apply in this order.
How long do you think this will go on?
It'll go on as long as the West provides the means for them to resist. If we ever run out of will or armaments that we can give to them, as I told one person the other day, I said, if there's one Ukrainian with one bullet and one rifle, there will be a war. They're not going to capitulate. It's not going to happen. So how long is anybody's guess, I don't think. Putin's theory of victory is he has to have a couple things. He has to have fresh water to Crimea. That's the one thing he had to have. He has that now. He wants a land bridge to Crimea. He also wants a land bridge over to Moldova, and he may be working on that.
Are you worried about this conflict expanding beyond the borders of Ukraine?
Belarus has joined the fight, so to speak. They provided individual augmentees. They provided basing and launching of precision missiles, et cetera. And there's strong evidence that they'll join in a formal military alliance in the very near future with Russia. So it'll be the two of those nations against Ukraine. We're probably in the 92, 93 era of the discussions on Bosnia. There's like, no way, no how are we going to intervene? But then the human suffering and the destruction became so great that the Western community says, we can't have this in Central Europe. I think that there's going to be such destruction and human suffering in Ukraine over the next couple of weeks and months that those humanitarian cries are going to drown out those that say we shouldn't do anything. There's going to be demands to do something. I don't know what it'll be, but it'll be something.
If you were a SOCUR commander today, what would your recommendation be to the commander, Todd Walters? What would your recommendation be about what to do?
I agree with General Breedlove, General Retired Breedlove, former SACUR, that there ought to be a no-fly zone. And to implement that, you have to be willing to do destruction and so forth in that area. So you got to protect the people on the ground, but you also have to protect whatever's flying above it. So that would require some degree of risk, both military and politically. So I think there ought to be a no-fly zone. I think there ought to be some humanitarian safe zones and humanitarian corridors. My reading of the traffic this morning was that the Russians are playing games with the humanitarian corridors. They say, okay, it's here. And people get there and they say, oh no, it's back over there. And so, it's that kind of garbage that's going on. So I think there needs to be some safe havens and safe corridors established along with enforcing a no-fly zone over those safe havens. And I think there needs to be some type of consideration on doing an asymmetric capability. And by that, I mean standing up a resistance, standing a formal resistance out of the country, preparing it for what may happen down the road.
Are you suggesting something like inserting the 10th group to do irregular warfare, conventional warfare, that kind of thing?
It's exactly what I propose.
Green Beret action?
Yeah, there are a lot of actors in that. It's not just Green Berets, but that would be part of it. But there's a irregular warfare political and military strategy that needs to be taken on. It's more than just guerrillas on the ground. There's a lot more to that.
The risk, obviously, of a no-fly zone is that if you have a kinetic confrontation with a Russian aircraft, that could quickly devolve into something much greater. Is that a risk that you think we should take?
It is a risk, and it's a risk that is to be expected. The authority on this, again, is General Breedlove. He had a very good piece in Foreign Policy 2 or 3 days ago that I commend to the readers or your audience to look at.
Any other final thoughts, Mike, before I let you go? I know you're tired and busy.
Yeah, so my final thoughts are that Congress needs to move with speed, the speed of need, to pass the Ukraine Relief Act, to get relief to the Ukrainians expeditiously. I think that there needs to be a international consortium established to help on the logistical side. I don't think it requires NATO, but I think there needs to be some type of structure, communications, and efficiencies built into moving all this material into the proper hands.